The few remnants of the so-called mortuary temple of Khufu lie on the eastern side of the Great Pyramid, close to its flank, and was once the terminus of the causeway leading to the Great Pyramid from Khufu's Valley Temple, nearly a kilometer distant. Very little remains of the Valley Temple and even less of the causeway. While the reconstruction of the mortuary temple is difficult and really very hypothetical, we believe that it had a rectangular plan some 170 feet wide. The walls were of fine limestone, the floor of basalt, and the pillars were granite. All that is left of the mortuary temple is the basalt floor paving of the courtyard, highlighted here in blue, a few foundation sockets for the pillars, and some water drainage channels. The construction of the flooring is remarkable in that instead of clearing a level base for the basalt blocks, the blocks were dressed on their undersides to roughly match the existing ground surface, and a form of cement or mortar-like compound was used to cement them in place. This cement-like fill can still be clearly observed around the edges of the flooring. Our exploration of the basalt flooring area revealed many blocks and broken fragments that had been separated from the main structure, many overturned or placed on their sides, and these remnant pieces, as well as the exposed side faces of many of the blocks still in place around the perimeter, display a variety of saw marks left from the construction phase. Some saw marks are visible along sliced faces, showing the well-defined traces of the path taken by the cutting tool, which are uniform, evenly spaced linear features, approximately a millimeter apart. Our thesis is that these cutting path traces clearly show that the stone was worked through at a very consistent and rapid rate. Conventional attribution is that copper drag saws and sand was used to perform this work, but the spacing and the level placement of the grooves left behind indicate a minimum feed rate of 1 millimeter in depth per blade stroke, if indeed done by drag saw, which has not been supported by modern demonstrations. Another observed characteristic is that of trimming or surfacing cuts, made in a manner which indicates that the saw or cutting tool was unsupported on the outside portion of the blade or tool, and yet the tool path is plumb, straight, and consistent across the face, indicating a very rigid and well-supported and extremely sharp cutting edge that did not flex or deviate outwards away from the work face. Some block fragments exhibit multiple shallow cuts in groups, which indicates that the progress of the tool through the stone was so rapid that it could make a cut of significant depth before the operators could realize their mistake and back it out to reset it, in some cases several times. This is not the sort of work error that would be produced by a copper and sand drag saw operating at the very slow rate of progression that has been demonstrated by modern experiments, which is in the range of just a few millimeters per hour in limestone, which is a much softer material than basalt. Other blocks were obviously squared off plumb on all sides with saws, but exhibit little to no tool marks, their cut faces being exceedingly smooth to the point of almost appearing polished. Again, this is not the sort of surface left behind by copper and sand drag saw demonstrations, which typically produce comparatively rough and uneven cut faces. One large block in particular, lying apart from the main portion of the platform to the north, has a complicated shape. Two sides are cut in several inches at an angle, with a third cut bridging between the angle cuts. Also present are several core drill holes in which evenly spaced tool cutting point grooves can be clearly seen, again indicating a very rapid feed rate through the stone. A peculiarity of these core drill holes is that their upper sides evolve to a more square cross-section, which is also tapered from top to bottom, but the corners are evenly radiused. One drill hole has a partial, small diameter drill hole trace beside it that seems to be the result of an error since it is very shallow. This smaller drill hole indicates a very rigid and strong holding fixture for the tool, because it was started on an angled step in the block surface, yet shows no indication of skipping or deviation. It seems that this block was shaped to receive one or more interlocking elements, or perhaps be anchored in place by matching fixtures, but these pieces are missing from the puzzle. Both the top and bottom of this block are rough dressed, leaving the question of whether or not it is upside down or whether it was ever intended to be visible, since it does not align with the very even top surface of the platform. One side displays a series of shallow trim cuts made at different angles of attack for purposes unknown. A common characteristic of the blocks in the platform is the signature jigsaw puzzle type joinery of abutting sides, where extremely tight-fitting interfaces were crafted at seemingly random angles and positions. To our minds, this is another indication that the methods used to cut and shape these blocks was relatively rapid and presented no great difficulty to the builders. On the south portion of the platform area, several foundation pits, presumably for the placement of the granite columns, can be seen, but unfortunately none of the columns themselves have survived. For those who will point out that multiple teams could be at work on many blocks at the same time, I agree, but my question would be how many drag saws and jigs would be available to the workforce? Dozens? Hundreds? The original courtyard was approximately 170 feet square. If we assume an average block size of 3 by 3 by 3 feet, the total is roughly 3,000 blocks, or 36,000 linear feet of side cuts, requiring 493 years of man-hours to complete. If we assign 25 teams to work simultaneously, non-stop during the daylight hours, the time required to rough out just the side cuts for the flooring is 20 years. Obviously, if we assume a greater number of teams at work, the total time is reduced. But in any event, the magnitude of the task is considerable if copper drag saws were employed. William Petrie theorized that much of the stone cutting traces visible on the plateau and other locations was likely made with fairly sophisticated drills and saws fashioned of bronze and with inset cutting points of hard jewels such as sapphire or ruby, and displayed indications of astonishing feed rates and material removal requiring great amounts of force applied to the work faces. Our limited explorations of exposed examples of ancient stone cutting in the area of the mortuary pavement would seem to support this thesis, as opposed to the use of copper drag saws and sand, which do not produce the tool signatures that match these samples from the mortuary paving. Although in an advanced state of ruin, the courtyard flooring is an impressive piece of work, and despite centuries of weathering and multiple earthquakes, the central portion remains level and solid.